this review is mostly going to be about the Protestant Reformation and the religious revolution that's going to kind of drastically change the world around this time period. So let's talk a second about the religious climate in Europe leading up to the Reformation, right? For centuries, the Roman Catholic Church really had very little competition in religious thought and their actions. If you were in the European Christian, if you were one before the year 1500, you really were a Catholic. There was no real major split here yet, and during the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church is really going to grow in size and power and wealth as a result of the Crusades, mostly. So really, one thing that you just need to know is that all European Christians, for the most part, were subject to the authority of the Pope in Rome. So what was the Reformation? And it really was this movement for religious reform in the Catholic Church. And it's going to lead to the establishment of Christian churches that did not accept the authority of the Pope in Rome. So what are some of the things that provoked this reform? And for starters, really, the Italians dominated the church, right? If you look at a list here of all the popes from about 1400 to 1500, what you're going to notice is that every single one of them were Italian. So when it comes down to it, the Germans and the English nobles and the kings and things, they didn't really like this too much. They would have liked to have some of their own men become popes, just because of the influence and that it would be able to buy them essentially and help them. Additionally, there were a number of small states to the north here, right? There was no unified Germany at this point, and these small Germanic states, the Pope in Italy, in Rome in particular, is going to have a really hard time imposing any sort of central authority on a number of small kingdoms and things like that, right? When you look over at England and France and Spain and Portugal, they were all unified. They were all more or less one entity at this point, and as a result, the Pope could talk to these kings and such and be able to push out what he wants. But in the Germanic states above, the Holy Roman Empire, if you will, there's no one person that they can talk to, and these states are going to kind of be a thorn in the side of the Italians. Additionally, in Italy, you have this merchant class that's going to kind of begin to challenge the church's views. This is going to be mostly a result of this idea of borrowing and lending money, this idea of usury, which is this idea of lending money with interest. The church is not going to like this. They say that it's kind of against the teachings of the church, and these northern merchants, they make a lot of money this way, right? So when you have the church saying one thing and these wealthy merchants wanting to do a different thing, it's going to lead to some friction there that's going to kind of help propagate this Reformation once it actually gets rolling. Also, the fact that the church had a lot of political and power and wealth is going to lead to political conflict when it comes down to it. You also have the church's corruption and the sale of indulgences, right? Indulgences are these things where you basically have the higher-ups in the church selling them, and they're saying that if you buy these indulgences, your soul will be saved, essentially. And there are going to be people that don't like this, right? Some of these early reformers, and this is going to be the big thing that Martin Luther is going to really latch onto as saying it's corrupt and against what should be traditional church practices, but that's going to be one of the big things. So some of the big people that you're going to need to know that ultimately resist and change the Christian church as we know it through the Protestant Reformation are people like Martin Luther, who is going to come from these Germanic states up in Germany, up in modern day Germany anyway. John Calvin, he's going to kind of pave the way in Switzerland through the work of Martin Luther, at least what Martin Luther started. You're going to have King Henry VIII of England, who is going to step away from the Catholic tradition in England, and then Queen Elizabeth, who is going to kind of also step away from the Catholic Church. So Martin Luther, right, Lutheranism, his views really are that salvation is going to come from faith alone, right? The Bible is the ultimate authority and that all humans are equal before God, and that he believes that these indulgences, right, this exchange of wealth for salvation, were completely not okay. It took advantage of poorer people who would pay a lot of money to have their souls saved because they didn't, their lives in the peasantry essentially was really tough, and they were hoping that in the afterlife they would be saved. So they would pay all this money to the church, and Luther really hated this, right? He basically, among other things, he writes these 95 theses in 1517, and he posts them on the Wittenberg church door, which you can see the kind of painting of him doing so on the bottom there. And these are all complaints about the Catholic Church, and this is really going to be where that separation first takes place. It's going to be the birth of the Protestant Church. John Calvin is going to really take up the mantle in this Protestant Reformation as well. And his beliefs really kind of are a bit different than Luther's, for sure. He believes in this idea of predestination, right? That your fate has already been decided by God, and that that faith is going to be revealed by living a righteous life. He's going to emphasize work ethic and hard work and things like that. And he's going to break with the Catholic Church in 1530, and it's just going to be another expansion of the Protestant movement, and this is going to mostly be in modern-day Switzerland and kind of expand a bit into France as well. So I wanted to give some background on Henry VIII just to kind of get into this story, because it is kind of confusing and how we get to where we do. So it's really super interesting too. So you have King Henry VII, who is King Henry VIII's father, who is going to win the War of Roses in England, and he's going to take the throne in 1485. So they needed a male heir to solidify the Tudor dynasty. So King Henry VIII is going to marry his dead brother's ex-wife, whose name is Catherine. So he is going to have a daughter with them, right? And unfortunately, that's not a male heir for him, and he's going to become upset by this, right? And he's going to keep trying and trying and trying to have a male heir, and he doesn't get one through Catherine. So he is not going to. He's going to try something, right? And he wants to ultimately divorce Catherine, and he tries to get the consent of the Pope, who does not agree. The Pope will not grant this divorce because Catherine is actually the daughter of the King of Spain, who was kind of buddy-buddy with the Pope at the time. So when the Pope would not grant this divorce, essentially King Henry VIII is going to kind of break away from the Catholic Church, right? So he's going to end up divorcing her. He's going to break from this church, break with Rome, and he's going to establish what becomes known as the Church of England, in other words, also known as the Anglican Church. And another thing that he does is he basically takes all of the church land and other things that the Roman Catholic Church had in England, and he's going to kind of reappropriate these, right? Since England is no longer part of the Catholic Church, he's going to pass these over to bishops and things like that, and other priests that are now part of the Church of England tradition instead of the Catholic tradition. So I found this kind of map that does a really good job at kind of showing all the different wives of Henry VIII, right? So after he first divorces Catherine, who remember he had married the first with, essentially he's going to then get another wife whose name is Anne, and Anne unfortunately is not going to also be able to give him a male heir, but she is going to have another daughter named Elizabeth with King Henry VIII, right? So through a number of different things, she is actually going to be beheaded by King Henry VIII, and he's going to end up marrying another woman named Jane. And Jane, he actually does have a male heir with, whose name is Edward, who becomes known as Edward VI. And unfortunately, Jane is not going to live here. She's actually going to die of natural causes and childbirth and attempts at childbirth and things like that, and just not being well. So Edward, before he's actually able to come of age to be the king, he's going to die in his early teens. And one thing that Jane had been able to do was convince Henry VIII to actually restore Mary and Elizabeth in the line of succession, so that if something happened, essentially, that it wouldn't go to it wouldn't go to somebody else. It would stay in the family, essentially. So when Edward does not make it, Mary is actually going to become the queen. Uh, so remember now, with Mary becoming the queen after the death of Edward VI, she is the daughter of Catherine, right? And Catherine was Henry VIII's original wife. And as a result, she was still Catholic. This was before the split, right? So Mary actually will have taken up the Catholic tradition after her mother, and she's going to want to actually try to restore Catholicism to England, and she's going to want to do this, and she's going to do it very violently, which is where she's going to get her nickname Bloody Mary. She's going to kill a whole number of people, and she's going to burn a lot of people as well, and it's going to be a violent attempt to kind of restore Catholicism in England, right? She actually marries the King of Spain and attempts to have a child with him, and unfortunately for her, she is actually not going to live here. She's going to pass herself, mostly as a result of just complications of not being well and attempting to have children. And as a result of having no kid with the King of Spain now, Elizabeth then falls in the line of succession as next, right? So Elizabeth comes to power, and she's actually the daughter of Anne, right? And Anne was the second wife of Henry VIII, and therefore the wife that he divorced his original wife for. So she will have taken up the Protestant tradition, or the Church of England, right? And Elizabeth's now going to come to power and begin to kind of restore that back in England after Mary had tried to restore Catholicism. So she does. She establishes and reestablishes this Anglican Church, as the official Church of England. But she's going to be a bit different than her sister, right? She's going to be a lot more tolerant of dissenters, people that are going against it, especially because, you had just returned to a Catholic tradition. She wanted to be a lot more merciful than her sister. And she is going to really push for expansion of English power through colonialism, right? You're going to begin to get the kind of the first explorations and colonies in England and from England into the New World. And ultimately, she is going to be in charge when the King of Spain is going to feel that the secession really should have gone to him after the death of Mary. And he sends the Armada, and he sends an invasion force to England, and Elizabeth and her people are able to kind of fight off this invasion force and win this victory over the Spanish Armada and the extremely powerful Spain at the time period, right, from all of the wealth that they had acquired from the New World. And it's going to really set up England now to become this kind of powerhouse for going forward. This video is going to be kind of the second part of the Reformation. And the conflict and how it impacts Europe, especially. So I just wanted to kind of remind you of something. So prior to Martin Luther, you're going to have some of these people that are known as dissenters, right? These people named John Wycliffe, who is going to be declared a heretic by the church, who's going to really, against the papacy, he's going to translate the Bible into English. And that's going to be a relatively big deal, because when you now have a Bible that is able to be read by other people and not just the clergy, people are going to be able to then interpret it themselves, right? And that's a big deal and against the church's wishes. You also have a man named Jan Hus, who is going to also be declared a heretic, and he is also going to kind of be against the Pope and this church hierarchy. So the Reformation itself has its roots in theology, which is other words known as just the study of God, right? And the thing is the Reformation is going to lead to some major religious differences, right? When you have differing in opinions and how to interpret the Bible and things like that, people get really into it, and these differences, as a result, are going to lead to things like hatred of the different groups. The different Protestant groups and the Catholic groups are not going to get along, and therefore you get some major wars and destruction that comes as a result of the Reformation. And with that, you're also going to get some economic and major political changes as well. So just a little bit of background, right? Germany didn't exist, as we were kind of saying in one of our other videos here, in the 16th century as a whole, right? It was part of what's known as the Holy Roman Empire. And the Holy Roman Empire in particular was this loose confederation of like 300 different kingdoms and principalities, right, that are all going to be kind of ruled by different people. And you then have this Holy Roman Emperor who kind of supposed to be overseeing all of this, who's usually this member of this wealthy and political family, royal family known as the Habsburgs. So this is a map of the Holy Roman Empire at the time, and you can kind of see all these different kingdoms, these small kingdoms here, and you can kind of see also what type of religion or what type of Christianity that these areas started to kind of go to, right? So you had the Calvinist tradition, the Lutheran tradition, and the Catholic tradition all within these boundaries of what is known as the Holy Roman Empire, and therefore you're going to get some major fighting that happens as a result. Right, a lot of these princes in northern Germany had converted to Protestantism, and as a result, the Pope didn't have any authority in these particular spots, right? However, some princes did for religious purposes. Some also wanted to just challenge the Habsburgs and challenge the church to kind of better their political position and to get more land and wealth for themselves. The Habsburgs, they happened to be, again, leading this Holy Roman Empire, if you will, and they continued to support the Roman Catholic Church and that tradition. So you're going to get these conflicts between the German Protestants and the Catholics of the Holy Roman Empire, and it's going to result in a series of seriously devastating wars. You're going to have this big one. It really becomes known as this 30 Years' War. It's going to take place between 1618 and 1648. This is going to be very, very devastating for Europe, right? 4 million people dead in this time period. The population of the world really isn't nearly even close to what it is today. This is a pretty substantial amount of population for Europe, right? And 30 years of war is going to leave Germany's economy ruined. And this thing was going to kind of start as a bit of a religious war, but you're going to have this man named Cardinal Richelieu from France, fearful of the Habsburg power. He's going to kind of interject France as a result of political aspirations. He's going to kind of turn this war that started, again, as religion, from religion anyway, into a political war. And this is just a picture of him right there. This is a pretty great map because it shows the population loss based off a percentage of these particular areas during the 30 Years' War, right? So you can see areas there in red that over 50% of the population were killed as a result of these wars, right? And then even 30% and 40% and 20%, right? That's a pretty serious numbers it's worth noting for sure. So in France, right, take a step away from that, France is going to remain a Catholic country during the Reformation for sure. The Catholic monarchs are going to grant these people known as Huguenots, these Protestant Huguenots who were really of the Calvinist tradition that had fled Germany. They're going to kind of give them freedom of worship in what becomes known as the Edict of Nantes. And it's going to be issued by Henry IV in 1598. And he's going to kind of push the end to religious war in France. But just under 100 years later, this is going to be kind of revoked by Louis XIV in 1685. And this revocation is going to now lead to persecution of the Huguenots, essentially. And it's going to force them to then get out of France and flee France. So overall, the Catholic tradition is going to lead what becomes known as the Counter-Reformation. The Catholic Church, it responds to the criticism, and it's going to kind of take steps to reassert its authority. And these first steps really come from what's known as the Council of Trent, which is going to reaffirm most of the church doctrine and its practices, right, saying that what they've been doing has not been wrong. And then from there, they're going to create this Society of Jesus, which is going to become known as the Jesuits today, which were going to be founded as a means of kind of spread this Catholic doctrine around the world and kind of reassert and trying to regain a lot of this power that was lost from the Reformation. And also you're going to get what becomes known as the Inquisition, and the Inquisition is going to be used really as a means of kind of enforcing Catholic doctrine in particular areas for sure. Inquisition was an avenue for the Catholic Church to attempt to essentially restore its doctrine and defend its doctrine against heresy, right? And they are going to kind of begin to imprison and in some cases torture and burn people and things like that in the name of Christianity and defending Christianity. And a lot of these people were humanists, right, of what we were just kind of previously talking about in one of our earlier videos and in class. And these people that kind of went away from the church and its teachings, and you're going to get this kind of defense of Catholicism. And again, it's pretty ugly sometimes. You know, people are burned, they're tortured, and such. Here's just another picture of someone being burned at the stake for heresy. Here's another, someone on the rack, basically torturing them and pulling them from their arms and the legs until causing extreme agony for the person. The Reformation itself initially led to intolerance in Europe, right? That when you start to get these different groups, both groups or multiple groups are going to feel that they're right, and therefore they're not going to really tolerate each other, right? But gradually what happens is over time, you're going to get new attitudes that emerge and are going to kind of begin to foster this idea and this growth of secularism, right? Secularism is the view that religion should be excluded from public affairs and education. It's going to also push for individualism, and when you get this secularism of not really caring too much about religion, you're going to then get a growth of religious tolerance because they don't really care too much of which branch of Christianity or religion you are. This last piece here really can't be stated enough how important it was to the growth of the Reformation, and that is the role of the printing press, right? One thing that's going to do is kind of help grow European literacy, for sure, right? When you have access to a lot more books, which used to be quite rare because people actually needed to hand copy them, it's going to now have more books in people's hands, and that's going to kind of foster the growth of reading and literacy for sure. And that literacy is going to mostly be because people are trying to read the Bible. And when you have people that are now translating the Latin Bible into local languages like German and French and English, what's going to happen is that people now are going to be able to read these Bibles and read the Bible and be able to begin to interpret it the way that they want to, right? And that's kind of how you start to get these different Protestant traditions, because you get groups of people that read the Bible and get certain things out of it that the Catholic Church might not get out of it. And that's going to be a big deal, and that's why having it in different religions is super important, and how it really effectively changes the world so drastically and causes so many political issues that we kind of already been talking about, right? And that growth of literacy is going to really impact this time period. It's going to spread the ideas of the Reformation and the Renaissance and even the Enlightenment, to the people, and it's going to drastically change the world as we knew it. And on this map, you can kind of see the beginnings of the printing press and where around the world it was officially starting to kind of take shape, and when these areas got it. So that is it for the Reformation. So again, hope that it helped.